Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Thank you so much for being here. Before we dive into today's guest, one of my favorite people, I want to go over my offerings and what that looks like. So if you've been here before, you know you can find me at emotionalabusecoach.com or high-conflictdivorcecoaching.com. If you are to book a clarity call to work with me, which is basically just like a quick consult to see if we're a good fit, the dates that are on there will show dates that are further out. I don't open up all my dates because I do have reoccurring clients and a client base. So the ones that are, the availability is, offered sparingly. But if you are kind of ready to get going, you can always email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com. And I usually always have availability and things change, but sometimes I get emails of people saying you're only available, a month later, but that's just sort of how it is because I do prioritize my current clients. And if you become one, you'll know that too. I offer one-on-one validation calls, which are basically just a longer one-off call if you're not ready for a coaching commitment or to continue to work together. That's an option to sort of get immediate help and to really do a deep dive on your situation. And that's available online too. And the same policy applies. If you email me, I usually can get you in sooner, but otherwise you can book a call using my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. I have courses available, including how to divorce a narcissist, documentation for family court, and all of April I posted on my Substack, the link is below in my show notes, about how to divorce a narcissist, various aspects that come up in co-parenting, different aspects of the divorce process. I really devoted the month to high conflict divorce in general in all its aspects. And of course, 30 days of posts is never going to cover everything that people experience. So I will still continue to post about that throughout the remainder of the year. I have been doing a bit of a topic a month right now. So check that out if you are wanting to learn just more about the process and think through the things that Victoria and I talk about in a deeper way. And so now my guest is one of my favorite people. She's been on here twice before. Victoria, she is a divorce financial analyst, and she is amazing at what she does. She has such a relatable way of explaining things. Her newsletters are so good. They are very detailed. It's not like just another piece of junk in your inbox. It is a very detailed, action-oriented approach. And what I really appreciate about her too is just how much I can tell that she wants to help. And I'm so glad that I know her and that she is in my corner. And I really think that you will learn so much from this episode. If you need support, like I said, you can always reach out to me. If you want support from Victoria, all of her links will be in the show notes. And so you can just head down there and check them out. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. It's always fun to chat with you.
Yes, I know. We always can do this, like the intro before we talk for like probably the whole hour. So I would love if you can just introduce you. My people that listen have probably heard your other podcast, but just to start there, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. So my name is Vctoria Kirilloff, and I am a certified divorce financial analyst and a family financial mediator. And I founded Divorce Analytics, which is my divorce financial planning firm, where our goal is really to help people replace their divorce fear with financial facts. I've been doing this for essentially the last 8 years. I had a super abusive relationship with, I call him Voldemort. He was my college sweetheart, and we had a 10-year relationship, and it was just super, super abusive towards the end. And I had to figure out how to get out. And thankfully, I have some money skills, and my dad was really invested in making sure I knew how to operate in a man's world. I was able to essentially create a financial plan that showed how we could divide everything up. And I was able to present that to Voldemort at our kitchen table. And, our relationship was physically abusive, and I wasn't sure, who was going to end up, in a body bag, but sure wasn't going to be me, but he was
Yeah.
not a nice guy. And, the point is, our relationship was filled with issues, but because I reframed the conversation and I stopped his freaking gaslighting, we were able to actually have a relatively amicable divorce where we both were able to come up with a win-win outcome based off of my financial report. And we had a pretty easy rest of, the uncoupling. And so I know it's possible. I've lived this life. And my whole goal with divorce analytics is to help women and men just like myself who are leaving these abusive situations understand the financial implications of their divorce so they don't end up in divorce purgatory.
Yeah.
Not a good place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Which sometimes I'm still in, as we just talked about. Yeah. No, but that's such an important thing. And just from, talking to you, but also from following you on Instagram and being on your email list, I wonder if we could just touch on about before we get down into some of the more details about the strategy that you have around, presenting like a global solution almost at the beginning to bring bring that to the table as the talking point rather than going like, how about this piece? How about this piece? But I want this, but to almost like reframe the conversation. And like, what I really like about that approach is that it makes things, well, one, obviously much more organized, but it also brings I think it just pulls back a lot of the abuse that can happen when the little things are being worked out. Can you talk just briefly about that strategy? Because I think it's going to be important, even though we're going to, dive into the weeds today.
For sure. So I think it's really important that everyone knows that divorce is an order of operations event. Mm-hmm. And so essentially what that means is there's a specific sequence of doing things. And obviously each situation is going to be different, and you're going to have different personalities that pull you in opposite directions, but the process remains the same. You need to really figure out the entire marital estate value and develop a way to divide it and address the other issues for resolution, such as spousal support, child support, all of those other auxiliary issues. And so when people are working with an attorney, a traditional attorney, right, they have a different way of doing things. And so keep in mind, there's some good attorneys out there. There's some that do things, very much so the same way it's been done for 1,000 years, and it leaves a lot to be desired. So when you are working with a typical attorney, they adjudicate or negotiate one topic at a time. And this is miserable, because not only does it prevent you from using the leverage from one area of your divorce to getting a better deal, it actually makes it so much more expensive.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, a lot of these issues interplay with each other. And so you can't really talk about, divorce division of all the assets unless you know who's going to get the house and if they can qualify for it. And so it's really on your shoulders to put together a global settlement proposal. Otherwise, you're going to end up spending you're going to be nickel and dimed to death, except it's going to have a lot more, a few commas attached to the end of the result. So making sure that you put together a cohesive strategy is going to be the best way, especially if you are dealing with a gaslighter or a narcissist or an abuser, right? They, I pretty much deal with 90% of my cases are very abusive. And in these cases, it always comes down to the abuser continues the same bullshit they were doing during the marriage. and you have to have a way to counteract that.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the best way to do that is with documentation, right? And this is where it's so important to get all of the organizational pieces together before you actually, move forward with the divorce if you are able to. So you do have all of the documentation and the pieces in place so you don't end up with, a multi-figure divorce cost at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that is so important, but it also kind of goes right to the first question I had for you today. And like literally, like I have a question, the next one goes right into the documentation thing. So I think it's certainly aligned, but when so say somebody is like, they're like, okay, I want to get to that point. I want to get to the point where like I am able to sort of present this holistic picture, but I actually have no idea what the family finances are. What do you typically recommend, or what should they do if they're starting to think about divorce? And maybe for this example, we just think about it in terms of like, if this person, man or woman, doesn't have a job, but this is what they're thinking of. So maybe their job is, taking care of the kids, more of the home life. That's what they've chosen, which obviously puts the power on the other side, especially if the finances are restricted. We can assume this is a control dynamic. But if they don't have access to the accounts, maybe they don't even know how many accounts there are.
Yeah. So this is really, really common. I can't tell you how many times, especially in financially coercive relationships, where one person, is not really given access to the funds. And so it's a little bit of a reconstruction job that we have to do, but I really have noticed clients know a lot more than they give themselves credit for. Yeah. And so if you are still living with your partner, obviously, it depends on how abusive they are. Some of my clients, they're being electronically surveilled in their home. Some clients don't have those extreme issues to deal with. So it's always important to keep in mind that your case is going to have its own peculiarities that you're going to have to be mindful of. And so, the ideas that I share with you today are, good for general education purposes. Mm-hmm. But if you guys do need, specific advice, make sure you reach out to the right financial or legal professional. And then, as always, things are going to be a little different in your state. So with that in mind, as you are kind of going through and dealing with this, you have to, start kind of mapping together everything. And so a good place to begin is generally with the tax return, because, this is not going to show you a full balance sheet, but it'll at least give you some idea as to what kind of, how much money is coming in from an income tax perspective. And that's another caveat, because how you do an income tax calculation for the IRS is different than how you determine the total income for a divorce calculation, right? And so, especially if your spouse is a business owner, if you are, there's going to be more little things for your calculations to have into consideration. So, a good place to begin again is with that tax return. But then also, I have a 4-page document checklist on my website under the free tools page that it will kind of help get the juices flowing. Not everybody's going to have everything on that worksheet, but it will help you start organizing and, keeping an eye out for the information that you need to be gathering.
That is super helpful. And I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes so that people can go right to the list. I'm making a note right now, so that they can get it if they want to look at it. I think you're right. And I wonder if you can expand a little bit on that they know more than they think, because I believe that too. And usually once I've worked with a client to get started finding just different things, or even parts of account numbers, it's like, okay, maybe you only have the last, 4 numbers or something, but that's still information because you know where it is, the account number that you can get things subpoenaed, at least if you know what bank it's in, and so what is that your experience too, that once they start going, they actually realize, okay, I can find at least some of it?
Oh my gosh, Jessica. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, because keep in mind, there has generally been so much freaking gaslighting, especially regarding the money in these relationships, right? And so it's not like you have to break through almost like that hard outer layer of the incorrect financial narrative, right? Where, that has just been established by that abusive person so they can continue to rain hell down on everyone.
Right.
So you have to, that's where I love working with divorce coaches like you, Jessica, because that's where, that holy trio of divorce professionals, the attorney, the coach, and the analyst really work best together. There's that emotional stuff that you have to work through with the coach, and that helps you really understand how bad they were working or how hard they were working to perpetuate these lies. And so my role as the analyst is to come in and really make sure all of the documentation is in place to make sure that we're truly maximizing the marital estate value. And that's something I think is really important to talk about, because attorneys, like, God love them, but they're not trained in personal finance, nor are they trained in how to deal with high conflict personality disorders unless they have gotten post-secondary education. And let me tell you, they oftentimes don't. Their business is essentially the war of attrition. And in a war of attrition, it's, you essentially capitulate the other party into doing what you want by a lot of small losses. And so they have a different modus of operating. So it's really important as you're in these initial stages to have defined financial variables or know where your unknowns are. That, it doesn't matter if you don't know, because there's always a process to get that information, but you need to know what you don't know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think there are ways to begin to figure it out even when you don't know, like I said, look at the mail. Like I used to have someone, when the mail would come in and then she'd leave it on the table, she would just write down the banks that were sending mail, and there was another one that, like, where her partner went on a business trip and she just used the time to go and be like, all right, I'm going to do one swoop of, what other accounts or credit cards or things could I find? And she found, this is one of the weirdest, or it's actually not that weird, but it's the bizarre stories, but it happens so often. So that's why it's not actually bizarre, is she found a shoebox of credit cards. And it ended up coming out in the divorce later on that they were all maxed out. And so the amount of debt was crazy, but she was I remember, I'll never remember, is the picture she sent me. She was and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And I was like, but now take pictures and write them all down,
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it is crazy. It is crazy. And you're right. And imagine if you're going one at a time as you find this, and then communicating with your lawyer, and one at a time, and then communicating with your lawyer, that bill is so high. Instead of just okay, let me gather everything I can find and then, put it together, look at the information, possibly work with somebody like you that is okay, there has to be something like this here. Or, okay, if you didn't get the tax returns, that's another piece of the puzzle before it goes to your attorney, because then you're also showing them look, I'm doing the work here, but now I need you to help me manage this legally.
I think you said that so succinctly. And you have to keep in mind, I think, that an attorney is a linguistical warrior.
Yeah.
They are not you kind of have to point them in the right direction and then push them, out the door and say, go get it. So once you kind of do your homework, right, you can save yourself not only a lot of money, but it's also increasing your divorce experience. I am a big proponent of divorce does not have to suck. It can truly be the healing that you need to have a really successful rest of your life. And in order to do that, you need to try to be working in a cohesive way so your divorce doesn't drain you not only of money, but also of much needed energy.
Yeah.
So I think it's also I want to circle back around really quick to the mail, because that is, gosh, before the internet, that was a surefire way to grab everything. But if if your spouse has a home office, as long as the mail is opened, right, you can go check in and, actually see what the statement says. But if you just kind of wait for them to open it, keep track of where they file it in their cabinet, you can really do a lot of digging and help yourself out. But the gaslighting has to have a way to be prevented. Otherwise, it will continue into a divorce. And the sad thing is that I see sometimes when attorneys get overwhelmed, their clients don't understand exactly all of the financial variables. It can just be very hard for an attorney to actually understand what they need to argue and fight for.
Right. Right. And I think that they are way less likely, like an attorney is way less likely to say, I'm confused. I don't understand. Like, let's get another, person in here to help like work through this, or, the finances side, all on the same page. I think a lot of times they take the approach of, no, I know what to do, when as and we're usually coming into this like very confusing time of life and overwhelming time of life at the most exhausted we've ever been. And
yes.
and so like we're just like, oh, okay, I guess they get it, rather than being able to take a step back and ask yourself, wait, do they get it? Because maybe your attorney is an amazing attorney for protecting your children and for like standing up to your ex and their counsel too, but maybe where they are not the best when it comes to the finances and they just need some help. And it's more about, I think, like, I mean, obviously don't go tell them like, hey, you actually suck, when it comes to this, but to be able to just even for yourself say, no, this is her area of expertise. And I'm going to let her really drive the child ship right now. But when it comes to the finances, I want to get extra support on board because that will help me feel safe on this case and eventually save me money and time and stress as we go on.
Yeah, I think that's just so beautifully put. Attorneys, they have a great role to play in the process, but you just have to keep in mind they are not going to be able to answer your financial questions. And they are always looking to the legal system to dictate their process. Mm-hmm. And that is very much so set up in like, let's talk about one topic at a time, unless you come prepared, right?
Right.
So it's all essentially on your shoulders to really, provide the information and to honestly steer the ship. I've made decisions where I've been in stressful situations, and as soon as I hired an attorney, I'm like, thank God, I don't have to think anymore.
Yes.
And it's like, no, it was the wrong mindset. And it's actually when you hire the attorney, when you build out your divorce team, that's when you actually need to lean into the process. This is all like, we're all working for you, that client, and we need to know exactly what you're looking to get out of this experience and what your financial concerns are and all of the, financial realities that we have to deal with in your spouse's personality issues, right? All of this gets rolled into one really traumatizing or could be potentially traumatizing event. And so that's really where working with a coach to manage the emotions so you can show up with your analyst and your attorney in your best mindset to really maximize this experience. And it is going to be a lot of work on the front end, but honestly, it saves you so much heartache and just insanity, right?
Right.
I can't tell you how many times, I really, not to be bashing on attorneys, they just don't understand how all of this is going to work out in regards to the family finances when you move from one house to two houses. And, a lot of people kind of forget, unless they're in finance like myself, that your income tax they're going to change. You're going to go from married to single or either head of household. And this is going to not only reduce the amount of income that you bring in, but it's also a wonderful opportunity to figure out how to deal with the child tax dependency situation. If you have one kid, then you're going to have to negotiate. And if your spouse is a higher earning spouse, or if you are like that, child tax status is going to mean a hell of a lot to you, because it's going to enable you to go from a single income filer status to a head of household.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to save you a little bit more money. And, so that has a lot of value. And, that conversation is never actually had unless you're working with a financial professional to kind of set the stage to help that topic be properly leveraged.
Yeah, that's such an important point too. And that, and I think the way that you're phrasing it, like when you talk about it, it's so clear to you because it's the world that you live in. It's how your brain thinks. Same for me when I talk about like coercive control and things like that. It's like, so it's exactly, because I'm seeing it. They're not trained to see it, but they also are not. And a lot of times they're not filling in the gaps, of their own education, where I think like, obviously you and I, we do in these areas. And I want to talk a little bit about like the role that a financial analyst or divorce analyst can play when someone feels totally in the dark about money. So say you have a client that really just is like, I've had these clients too, like it's so overwhelming, and maybe they can't get all that they're struggling to find all the documents, but they clearly need help, because that's how, and their lawyer might even be saying to them, you may need to get outside support to help you get this stuff together. What is the role that like you play in that scenario?
Yeah. So it always depends on what the issues for resolution are within that household. But generally, it always kind of centers around either child or spousal support and then determining the total marital estate valuation. And so always I like to figure out how urgent their cash flow needs are. And this is, I think we were actually just talking about this before we started the podcast. I see so many times where I have the spouse that gave up their career, they are raising the kids, and then the divorce gets dropped on them. And then all of a sudden their spouse cuts off all the money. Yeah. And it is super overwhelming. And, it's not an easy position to be in. And so this is where having your financial information at your fingertips can be just the world of difference in the end. And so you need to figure out, I think one of the most important things is figuring out your monthly expenses. This is going to help you actually get an emergency spousal support order. And that's where I think an analyst can be so helpful, especially when you are dealing with a child custody issue. That's probably going to be the most pressing concern. But I would say equally important is making sure you have spousal support.
Yeah.
And so depending on what state you're in, sometimes you can't go back and ask for retroactive support. So making sure, you have the mental bandwidth to kind of tackle those two topics at once is going to just make the rest of your divorce easier. And so with that being said, we generally start by figuring out the budget. I know it's so not sexy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we're also raised in this like wonderful capitalistic like juggernaut where we're always told if we have any type of emotional dysregulation, well, the best way to solve it is like with a trip to the mall or by walking line to Amazon. So you have to be really kind to yourself, especially if you feel like you're the least financially savvy spouse in the marriage. I guarantee you know more than you actually realize. And the best place to really begin is just by really writing down all of the information that you know, and then start listing the information you don't. And so we're then able to kind of, take that and expand upon it, getting those tax returns, building out the budget, making sure, just doing a simple exercise and listing out all of the assets that you have. That's a good way to begin.
That sounds, that I totally hear that. And it kind of just goes back to like trying to get as much information as you possibly can. And before, I think just like putting yourself in a place of like prepping for the divorce before it, like almost like once you decide, I think I want to do this, to start beginning to put things together, it's going to help you regardless. Just to even just to advocate for yourself if you're in the relationship longer, to want to to see the financial records and the transparency, and to, that's a dangerous place sometimes to go. But I think my listeners probably get what I'm saying, just so that if you are realizing the coercive control, like, okay, well, I can begin to see what the picture is. And then, but the more, like, I think it kind of goes back to, like, I think the point we've made a few times, you probably know a lot more than you know, or you probably have access to a lot more than you think.
Well, and especially if you guys are still married and living in the same household, like, just go raid their office as long as the mail's open and they're not, keeping, if there's not a camera on the door or whatever it is, like, there's ways to get information, right?
Right.
Use Pillow Talk to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's so many tools, and it's like when we're going through divorce, our brain goes into fight or flight and we stop. If unless the answer is really easy, sometimes it just feels too overwhelming to figure out. So use the pre-planning stage to really benefit you, and just, keep your ear to the ground, write down everything that you hear, and keep track of that.
Yeah. Yeah. What are safe ways to set money aside or build a bit of a financial cushion if someone is not working and worried about retaliation from the other person?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the level of financial control the other person has on their money. And so in this situation, let's just assume that they're or not a single parent, they're a stay-at-home parent, and they have a credit card to buy groceries and all that other stuff. And so what I have seen clients do in the past is that they will, buy more than they need and then go kind of take it. They will go return it later, or they'll start getting gift cards as a part of that. But really, it's kind of a challenging experience to be in. You do have to kind of set up a separate fund. A lot of the times, you're going to have to either take on credit card debt or get a HELOC if you have absolutely no money. And that's not the best position to be in. So the more that you can plan ahead and start saving money here and there, the better off you'll be. Sometimes you have family members that are willing to step up. But a lot of the times I've seen people, they had a previous 401k from a job that they go in and use those monies. But it just is all about figuring out what resources you have, and then also taking into consideration the man or the woman that you're with and their, proclivities to high conflict and how they're going to respond to everything. And, really planning out how much money you're going to have to use to fight them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I know, like, before we started recording, you and I were talking just about, like, the belief system, and, like, financial beliefs. And I know you work with a lot of women that once they get on the other side, they are, well, women and men, I'm sure. Like, I work with both as well. And I don't like the idea that it's just men that are abusive. Certainly it is. We see a lot more women, but I've seen it on both sides, this pattern. And I am sure that there's a lot of, like, financial myths that are in people's minds that when they are, talking to you, there might be coming up as beliefs. But I'm curious of, like, what do you think some of those, like, myths might be that they're sort of operating off of, that you wish more people saw as, like, just maybe, like, it's not real. It's false. They are just a myth that might be guiding a belief system.
That is a brilliant question, Jessica. So I can't tell you how many times I have clients tell me, like, my money is our money, but his money is his money.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
No. And so all of these conversations that went on during the marriage, these financial narratives that the family established, they have elements of that coercive control in it. And so my job is really to go through and break those down, right? Any money that was made during the marriage, that, as long as there's not a prenup or a postnup in place, that is part of the marital estate, hands down. And, I feel really bad for my clients that have been told that their at-home contributions do not have economic value. This actually gets me really fired up.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It's like, well, who would be, that fires me up too. Cause I'm like, okay, then if you go to work from say 8 to 6, please then share with me like who's going to watch how are you paying for childcare then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Precisely. Well,
Yeah.
and so that's really where I enjoy doing spousal support calculations, because most people honestly have no idea what their life costs. And then they just think that the stay at home parent is like free labor, or not even labor, right? They're just like, I don't even know what their thought process is in their mind, that they completely discount what it would cost for that person to, be replaced by a nanny or whatever. But then also, they totally forget that what has enabled them to have in life, right? They get this beautiful family. They get to like have their high powered job, whatever. They get to live their best life. And like, really, they get to either be like a Disneyland dad or whatever it is. And, just kind of come in when everything is great and kind of stir the pot for mom, or, whatever it is in your household. So, so many of these people really need to be brought back down to reality. And I was just working with a gal. I mean, it was insane. Her husband was like making $50,000 a month,
Oh
and he
my
lived
gosh. Yeah.
but even worse, he was living overseas where it's not taxed. And so she's living in California, barely making like $6,000 or $7,000 a month, and their financial narrative was so jacked up.
Mhm, mhm.
He was sending him money.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, and then you also see it with the abusive people, that they're always like, I'm broke, I'm poor, I have nothing to give. Oh, if I have to give you, $500 a month in child support, I just can't live. I'm going to be in the poorhouse. And
Yeah.
they are so good at removing themselves from the accountability process. They have probably, rubbed that belief off on you. And so that's another thing where, people, they've been outside of the family finances, and they just think that they're going to have to YOLO it all on their own. And that's not right. And this is where getting that emergency temporary, or the emergency spousal support order, is going to really help that economically disadvantaged spouse, because like, it's not just the divorce and all the other stuff that you have to deal with. It's also like updating the messed up mindset that enabled that abusive person to have all of the power in the marriage.
Right. And it levels the playing field too, right? It's not just like the power and controls on one side. I feel like it levels it a little bit, because now this person, especially, and also like comes off looking really bad if they're like complaining about the money to the court system that they're giving, in the temporary support. It kind of shows some of their cards of their entitlement. And of course it depends on the judge, but it's not a good look. Just like how it's not a good look when people are leveraging parenting time for child support. Like, child support it is your duty as a parent, that you like, and a requirement. And that's why it works on a calculator.
Absolutely. And that, I wish there was a different way. Unfortunately, I have not seen a foolproof way to force the other person to uphold their percentage of the non-covered child support related costs, right? So, child support is only going to go so far. And then your kid's going to have all these other activities. And most of the time, most divorce decrees state that the expenses will either be split 50-50, or it'll be on a proportionality of income.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while that court order is great, it only works if the other person follows through.
Right.
So this is where, unfortunately, you have to document all of the expenses that they're not paying, so then you can take them back to court to then get them to pay. And so it's not, it's just kind of a crappy system to begin with. And so that's really where if you have all of your financial ducks in a row, if you like clearly understand that, the children's historical non-covered expenses by child support, right? You can then try to help educate that other spouse into capitulating and complying with you. But at the end of the day, some people are just sticks in the mud, and you're going to have to take them back to court, unfortunately. And so that's really where documentation, saving, your text messages, either using that, Our Family Wizard or some type of co-parenting app, but documentation and using it in an objective way. This is like another crappy thing, but the court doesn't want to know anything about your feelings.
Yeah, that honestly, Victoria, that I was going to ask you that question next, and you're like right on part, and like it's probably our last question, because of the time. But you send out these amazing newsletters, and they're super detailed. And one of them that you sent out in the last 2 months was about not letting your emotions affect your divorce strategy. And that's exactly where you're about to go. So I wanted to first name, the newsletters are amazing and I want people to sign up. But two, can you explain like how the emotions can kind of like really hijack some of the documentation at times?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where I wish it was a different way, but the court system is so desensitizing and dehumanizing. This is not like where you go to feel good about yourself or to have your feelings hurt, unfortunately. The only thing it really cares about is the objective facts, and it does not want to have any like extraneous emotion associated with it. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that the emotional person gets labeled insane. They get labeled as crazy. They're the crazy person in the relationship. And then unfortunately, that fuels and feeds the fire for the high conflict person, because they're like, oh yeah, look it, they're getting upset when they shouldn't be. And so it's truly this double-edged sword. So that's really where you come into play, Jessica, because that emotional support that you provide as a divorce coach can really set people up to have a successful court appearance. But when it comes down to actually presenting and preparing your evidence, you have to keep in mind that a divorce is it is a lawsuit. And so this is, 100% a business event that has a legal and financial implication, an emotional one as well in your life. So you have to treat it as such. Otherwise, what ends up happening is the court will, I've seen it work that a woman got upset about losing her child, and there, it was proof that she shouldn't have the kid then, and it was just like, what? I mean, in what world a mother getting upset for not having access to her child is then, proof of her mental instability?
Right.
And unfortunately, judges and family law attorneys, frankly, a lot of them are disordered themselves.
Yeah,
they are high conflict assholes. Sorry.
No, they are. Like a lot of attorneys are narcissists. It is just the same thing with like police officers, FBI agents, judges. Like that's the field that they're in. But salespeople, right? Like that's kind of the environment.
Absolutely. And so you have to keep in mind that these people, like, they generally are going to see your emotions as either an unwanted intrusion or as a sign of like you just not being, a good person, which is, we all know, not true. And so when you are going through the financial division and any custody issue, you really have to be focusing on how you phrase things. And it seems kind of silly, right? But it's so important, using little things like Mr. Smith instead of John, stuff like this, because it helps create a little bit of a separation in your mind. So you can maybe, not get involved with those emotions, but you need to be able to clearly articulate without any type of maybe even negative connotation what that other person did, and have it be so objective that the judge can see for themselves. You don't need to give them, when we're dealing with high conflict people, they create so much, paperwork of their, crappy behavior, it's there. It is definitely there. And I have found out that unfortunately, most psychological and emotional abuse, there is no paper trail for it. But what there is a paper trail of is the financial coercion that they put you through. And so, depending on all of the elements of your divorce, you can pull on these to actually create an objective family financial narrative that explains how money was used as a power and control object in your relationship. And so that's where you really have a lot more opportunity when you are framing things objectively to use that knowledge to get you to a settlement and resolution sooner. It's just pretty powerful when you are able to kind of take a step back from your emotions. You obviously have to process them and be aware of them and give them their own due respect. But when you're dealing with attorneys or judges, it's 100% by the facts all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. And just like a quick note that if you are dealing with somebody that is financially coercive and you're struggling to show the court or even your lawyer patterns around the kids, it can be really useful to lean into like where they are being either coercive, controlling, withholding information, misrepresenting information financially, because it is so clear and it is numbers. And even if a judge doesn't fully understand like all the finances, which they likely don't, but they can see like, okay, if this account says this and your account says this, why is it like this? Or if you say that this is, this, all these accounts only have your name on it and this account, just has mom's name on it as a shared person, like they can start to begin to see what's going on, especially when it gets down the road to discovery and the other side doesn't provide documents, or they do provide documents and there's so many red flags in it. It really starts to chip away at the credibility. So don't discount the finances. Like so many people say, including myself, I don't give a crap about money. I care about my kid. But I'm 8 years down the road, it's much different. I think when you are in the beginning, care about it because it will help set you up, but also it can expose a lot of the holes. And I think that's really important because your lawyer may think that, I think lawyers now think, they see everybody as a narcissist or not, or they're so used to their clients just complaining about their ex. They're not looking at it through the lens of coercive control. But when it comes down to the finances, it can be a really good tool, even if your heart of hearts doesn't really care because what you want is custody. I would say lean into it because it can show the pattern of behavior that's happening.
Absolutely. And, all of this works together. And I think it kind of goes back to our original topic. You need to build out a global settlement proposal for all of this, right? Because it works together. And the more that you can explain how the coercive control has impacted your family, your relationships, your kids and all that stuff, and here's the implications of the finances, it's easier then to get a judge on your side, right? It has to be very objective because at the end of the day, that's what the judge is there to be, right? They're supposed to be an unbiased third party. And so if you are able to meet them where they currently are, instead of providing, subjective narratives that kind of, I'm sure a lot of what has happened is accurate, but they don't want to hear it.
Right. Exactly. Victoria, as you know, I love having you on the podcast. I think everything you share is so informative. And it's just I'm not as financially minded, which, and so when you talk about it, I just want to just emphasize that it always seems approachable and that I don't get overwhelmed ever when you talk about finances, even in through reading your resources and things like that. And it's so important, so thank you so, so, so much for being here and also just for doing the work that you do.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I wish you could see the big smile.
Yeah, I can feel it. Yeah. Can you just share with people your website? And like I said, I'm going to put your resources in the show notes and everything. And you'll definitely be back again, but I just so that they can find you.
Absolutely. My name is Vctoria Kirilloff. You can check out my website at divorceanalytics.com follow me on Instagram at Divorce Analytics. And thank you so much. I do offer free 30-minute consultations. I know what this is like, guys. I don't have kids, but I have been with a high conflict person, and like I thought, I was like the end of the world was like near when I was with him, and I never thought I could be so happy without him. And I gotta say, like, this can be the best thing that ever happened to you with the right support and the right team. You do not have to stay in an abusive marriage. You can really live your best life. And there's truly no better revenge than just being who you are without them.
Yeah.
For all the world to see.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so, so much. And I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.